I'm Tessa Marlowe, and I'm 33 years old, which is old enough to know better and still young enough to be surprised when my own family proves me right in the worst possible ways. If you've ever been the responsible one, you already know what that label really means. It doesn't mean you're admired. It doesn't mean you're trusted. It means you're convenient. It means people assume you'll handle things, absorb things, forgive things, quietly, without needing applause or attention. In my family, responsible was just another word for invisible. I grew up in Cedar Ridge, Texas, the kind of town that sits close enough to Austin to borrow its bragging rights, but far enough away to keep its old habits and its long memory. Everybody knows your business. They know when you show up late to church, when you get a new car, when you argue with your mother in the grocery store aisle, and when your brother gets pulled over and somehow ends up home for dinner with a story that makes him sound unlucky instead of reckless. Cedar Ridge is the sort of place where gossip isn't even mean. It's a hobby, an identity, a way of confirming you still belong. And in a town like that, family reputations aren't private. They're public property. My dad, Clint Marlowe, built Marlowe Concrete and Fence from scratch. He started with a borrowed truck, a couple of tools, and the kind of stubborn pride that refuses to admit it's tired. He talks about the company like it's his true firstborn, like it's the thing that proves he mattered. I built a legacy, he says, often and loudly, as if repeating it turns it into scripture. He's not a villain in a movie sense. No evil laugh, no dramatic monologues. Just a man who has always believed that his sacrifices earned him the right to be obeyed. He measures love in usefulness. He measures worth in output. And he has always loved the business the way some men love their children. With ownership, with expectations, with the assumption that it will carry his name long after he's gone. The thing that makes me flinch is how easily he extends that pride to my brother, and how rarely he extends it to me. Dad has forgotten important moments in my life with a casualness that still stings when I think about it. He missed my college graduation once because he had a pour scheduled. Said it like it was weather, like the concrete had just happened to set at the same time my name was called. He didn't apologize. He told me, "You'll understand one day," like my disappointment was a childish phase I'd outgrow. My mom, Janice, is the reason our house didn't explode years ago. She's a professional smoother over, a woman who can swallow tension the way some people swallow pills, habitually, automatically, without even tasting the bitterness anymore. Her entire worldview is built around one goal: keep everything calm. Don't poke the bear. Don't poke the bear in front of neighbors. Don't poke the bear in front of church friends. Don't poke the bear at all. She doesn't pick sides. She absorbs impact. If Dad is angry, she becomes quieter. If my brother is upset, she becomes gentler. If I'm frustrated, she becomes pleading, not because she thinks I'm wrong, but because she knows I'm the one most likely to back down. Mom's love is real, but it's practiced in the language of compromise, mostly my compromise. She spent so long preserving peace that she sometimes treats honesty like a threat, as if the truth might shatter something fragile that she's kept balanced for decades with her bare hands. And then there's Logan, my brother. 27 years old, charming as a golden retriever, and just as likely to knock something over and blink innocently afterward. Logan is the family's center of gravity, whether he deserves it or not. He's funny, personable, the kind of guy who can walk into a room and make people feel like he's their friend within 30 seconds. He's also permanently between opportunities, which sounds like ambition until you realize it's just a softer phrase for refusing to commit to anything difficult. Logan is always going through something, always stressed, always misunderstood, always needing a little help that somehow turns into a lot. He can lose his wallet, his keys, and his job in the same week and still end up with someone else paying for his dinner because he's been having a rough time. People like Logan don't survive on competence. They survive on permission. And my family has given him permission his entire life. Logan works for my dad, too, which is one of those family arrangements that looks normal from the outside and makes you want to scream when you live inside it. He shows up around 10, disappears for long lunches, leaves by mid-afternoon, and still manages to talk about being exhausted like he's running a marathon. Dad pays him $56,000 a year and calls it teaching him responsibility, like writing a paycheck is a substitute for raising a man. Logan gets praised for breathing, for showing up, for having ideas. Dad asks him weekly if his plans are still cooking, as if Logan's brain is a gourmet kitchen instead of a microwave with a broken timer. Logan's ideas are mostly different ways to avoid working, reselling something, flipping something, starting something, but Dad nods along like he's listening to the next big entrepreneur. Meanwhile, I've built a life the boring way. I started as a receptionist at a small architecture firm, answered phones, scheduled meetings, smiled through people's impatience, and then I climbed. Slowly, consistently. 8 years of learning budgets, deadlines, client tantrums, and the kind of pressure that doesn't care about your feelings. I became the person who carries projects across the finish line. I handle problems before they become disasters. I make other people look competent. And my father has never asked what I do. Not once. It's not that he doesn't understand work. He understands work better than almost anyone. It's that my work doesn't fit his definition of impressive, and my achievements don't fit his definition of worth celebrating. The money thing is what really shows the shape of our family. Over the last 3 years, Logan has borrowed $1,950 from me. $100 here, $200 there. Always urgent, always temporary, always with a promise. I've got you Friday. Friday never comes. When I mentioned it once, to my dad, quietly, because I was trying to be mature and not scream into a pillow, Dad looked at me like I'd announced I was joining a cult. Families don't keep receipts, Tessa, he said, like I was morally defective for noticing. Logan keeps receipts for sneakers. The man has a shoe rack that looks like a museum exhibit titled Men Who Make Bad Choices. But in my family, my brother's irresponsibility is treated like a personality quirk, and my boundaries are treated like a character flaw. That's how it's always been. Logan gets softness, I get standards. Logan gets excuses, I get lectures. Logan gets forgiveness preloaded, and I get told to stop making things difficult. For years, I thought the problem was me. I thought I was too intense, too rigid, too sensitive. Words they liked to throw at me whenever I didn't smile through something unfair. But the older I got, the clearer the pattern became. I wasn't too much. I was just the only one expected to shrink. And when you grow up being asked to shrink, you start to confuse love with compliance. You start to believe that peace is something you earn by staying quiet, that being good means being easy. That saying no makes you selfish. Cedar Ridge didn't teach me that. My family did. And the worst part is how normal it all seemed until the day it didn't. 2 months before everything fell apart, I did something that felt small on the outside and seismic on the inside. I bought my first brand new car. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't loud. It didn't roar when I pressed the gas or make strangers turn their heads in parking lots. It was a 2025 Subaru Crosstrek, dark green, practical and sturdy, and exactly the kind of car that fits a person who plans ahead. I'd been driving a 2011 Ford Focus that rattled like it had opinions about every pothole in Texas. The air conditioning worked only when it felt emotionally available. The passenger door had to be coaxed open like a stubborn toddler. Every time I turned right, it made a scraping sound that sent a ripple of anxiety down my spine. I kept that car running for years because I had a goal. I saved slowly, carefully, deliberately. No shortcuts, no cosigners, no family help. Just me transferring money into a savings account every month and pretending I didn't see it disappear from my checking balance. The day I drove the Subaru off the lot, I sat in the driver's seat in the dealership parking lot and cried. Not because I was overwhelmed, but because for the first time in my life, I had bought something significant that no one could take credit for but me. It wasn't a hand-me-down. It wasn't a compromise. It wasn't a consolation prize. It was mine. When I showed it to my parents, I should have known what was coming. Dad walked around it slowly, arms folded, like he was inspecting a tool he hadn't approved the purchase of. "Subaru, huh?" he said. "Thought you'd want something with a little more power." He said this while leaning against his 2024 Lincoln Navigator, black and polished to a shine, the SUV he'd named the Boss, like it was a loyal dog instead of a machine. The Navigator was Dad's symbol of arrival, of dominance, of being the kind of man who doesn't have to ask permission. My Subaru was efficient and thoughtful and quiet. I didn't need it to roar. I just needed it to start every morning. Dad shrugged like I'd chosen sensibility over spectacle. I nodded and smiled because I'd spent my whole life nodding and smiling. The first real test came at a Saturday dinner in late March. The sky was clear, but the forecast warned of heavy storms overnight. Hail possible, the kind that dents metal and leaves evidence. I drove my Subaru to my parents' house and parked it in the driveway behind Dad's Navigator. It looked small compared to his SUV, like a responsible little sibling standing behind an overconfident older brother. Dinner was the usual choreography: Mom bustling in the kitchen, Dad in his recliner, Logan arriving late with a half-baked excuse about traffic that didn't exist. During the meal, Logan talked about a business idea involving reselling electronics online, something he described with vague enthusiasm and zero plan. Dad nodded along like Logan had just pitched a Fortune 500 concept. When there was a brief lull, I mentioned that I'd just wrapped up a complicated renovation project at work, an emergency redesign for a community clinic that would have lost funding if we hadn't delivered on time. I'd coordinated contractors, revised budgets, negotiated with city inspectors. It was one of the hardest projects I'd managed. "That's good, honey," Dad said, already turning back to Logan. "So you still thinking about that boat?" A boat. Logan couldn't manage his own bank account. I cleared plates before I said something I'd regret. After dinner, Logan cornered me near the pantry. He had that familiar tone, light, friendly, rehearsed. "Hey, Tess, I need a favor." His girlfriend, Alyssa, was supposedly flying into Austin early the next morning. Her flight had changed, landing at 6:30 a.m. Logan's Bronco was acting weird, which I later discovered meant he didn't feel like putting gas in it. He wanted to borrow my Subaru, my brand new Subaru. The car I'd owned for exactly 9 weeks. I felt the old reflex rising, the instinct to say yes, to avoid conflict, to smooth it over before it escalated. But something inside me stiffened. That car wasn't just transportation. It was proof of what I could build on my own. I shook my head. "No, I'm not lending it out, it's new." Logan blinked like I'd spoken another language. "It's one morning, I'll be careful." "No," he laughed, assuming I'd soften. "Come on, don't be like that." Like what? Like someone with a boundary? His expression changed instantly. The charm vanished. "Are you serious? You're gonna make this a thing?" Dad wandered in at the worst possible moment. Logan wasted no time. "Dad, can you believe this? Tessa won't let me borrow her car." Dad looked at me with disappointment so automatic it felt rehearsed. "Don't be difficult. Help your brother." "It's my car," I said evenly, and I said no. "You're being petty," he replied. Mom appeared in the doorway, anxiety already written across her face. "Honey, it would really help. You know Logan's stressed." There it was. The script. Logan needs. Dad commands. Mom pleads. Tessa yields, but I didn't. "No," I said again, my voice steady in a way that surprised even me. "That's my answer." Logan threw his hands up. "Fine, be selfish." He stormed toward the garage like the world had personally betrayed him. Dad shook his head at me. "You always make things harder than they need to be." Mom touched my arm gently. "Sometimes keeping the peace matters more than being right." I stood there, the weight of that sentence pressing on me. Keeping the peace had been my job for decades. Swallowing frustration, lending money, lending time, lending emotional labor. I had kept the peace so long I'd forgotten what it felt like to protect myself without apology. I left soon after. The storm warnings were getting louder, hail likely. My apartment complex parking lot offered no protection, just a tree that dropped branches like it had a vendetta. My friend Maribel had a covered garage and had told me a dozen times to use it whenever I needed. So I drove my Subaru to her building, parked it safely under concrete, and walked back to my parents' house to grab my jacket and say goodbye. In my rush, I left my main set of keys on the kitchen counter. I didn't think about it. I had my spare in my purse. I went home, made tea, and tried to convince myself that saying no didn't make me selfish. At 10:06 p.m., my phone buzzed. A text from Logan. Changed my mind. Taking the car. You'll get over it. And just like that, the boundary I'd drawn was about to test everyone in ways none of us expected. When Logan texted me, changed my mind. Taking the car. You'll get over it. I felt something cold and electric move through my chest. Not fear exactly, not yet. It was more like disbelief wrapped in anger. I called him immediately. Voicemail. I called again. Voicemail. I texted back, my fingers shaking harder than I wanted to admit. Do not touch my car. Bring my keys back. No response. That silence was intentional. Logan has always used silence as a tactic. It keeps people off balance. It forces them to chase him. I refuse to chase, but I won't pretend I wasn't rattled. I called my mom instead. He took my keys, I said, my voice tight. He just texted me that he's taking my car. Mom sighed softly, like I was overreacting to something small. Honey, I just saw him in the kitchen. He's probably joking. You know how he is? Yes, I did know how he was. That was the problem. What I didn't know, and what Logan didn't know, was that he couldn't take my car even if he wanted to. My Subaru was sitting safely under Maribel's covered garage, 3 blocks from my apartment, untouched. When Logan grabbed my main keys off the kitchen counter and strutted outside into the wet driveway, he found nothing but rain and his own humiliation. I can picture it clearly now. Him standing there in the dark, keys in hand, scanning the driveway where my car had been parked earlier, realizing I had moved it. That moment, when the world doesn't bend the way he expects, has always been the spark that sets him off. Logan doesn't tolerate embarrassment. He doesn't sit with rejection. He escalates. Instead of going back inside and accepting defeat, he did what he always does when something threatens his sense of control. He drank. He sulked. He convinced himself that he had been wronged. Alyssa had been texting him, supposedly frantic because her flight had been moved earlier again. I need you there. Don't bail on me. This is important. Those messages, real or exaggerated in his head, became fuel. Logan has always confused urgency with importance. If something feels dramatic, he treats it like destiny. Around 1 a.m., soaked in bourbon and ego, he made the decision that changed everything. If he couldn't take my car, he would take Dad's. Dad keeps spare keys in the utility drawer by the fridge, the same place he's kept them for years. It's one of those family secrets that isn't a secret at all. Logan grabbed the keys to the Lincoln Navigator, the black SUV Dad named the Boss, like it was some extension of his identity. In Logan's mind, this wasn't theft. It was borrowing. Dad would understand. Dad always understood. Dad had been smoothing over Logan's mistakes since he was old enough to walk. A broken window at school, a bar tab he forgot to pay, a fender bender that mysteriously disappeared after a quiet cash exchange. Dad had always stepped in before consequences had time to breathe. Logan had never learned what it meant to sit with the full weight of his own actions. At 1:27 a.m., Logan backed the Navigator out of the driveway. It was raining hard by then, the kind of steady Texas downpour that turns highways into slick mirrors. He pointed the SUV toward Austin and drove like the night owed him something. He had a mission. He had drama. He had a story forming in his head about how he'd show up at the airport like some hero who braved a storm for love. What he didn't have was sobriety. By the time he hit Interstate 35, the bourbon had blurred his judgment just enough to make him reckless. Witnesses later told police he was driving too fast for the conditions. Hydroplaning is a strange thing. Your car suddenly feels like it isn't yours anymore, like it's skating instead of gripping. That's what happened to him. The Navigator lost traction near a construction barrier, fishtailed, and slammed into concrete with a sound that reportedly echoed across 3 lanes of traffic. The SUV spun once before hitting again. The front end crumpled, airbags deployed, glass shattered. The storm kept pouring like it didn't care. Logan wasn't killed. He broke his collarbone, bruised his ribs, and sliced his hands on shattered glass. But he was conscious enough to try to restart the vehicle, conscious enough to consider driving away before anyone arrived. That detail doesn't surprise me. Logan's instinct has never been to confess, it's to escape. But the Navigator was done, and a witness had already called 911. By 2:41 a.m., state troopers were on the scene. They smelled alcohol immediately. They ran him through field sobriety tests in the rain. He failed. He blew a .1N. Not blackout drunk, not staggering, but legally impaired. Impaired enough. They cuffed him right there on the side of I-35 while the storm rolled overhead and Dad's precious SUV sat smoking against a concrete barrier. At 3:10 a.m., my phone rang. Dad was shouting before I could say hello. "What did Logan do to your car? The police called. He crashed your car. His voice was frantic, angry, already searching for someone to blame. I sat up in bed, heart racing. Dad, my car isn't there. It's in Maribel's garage. He barked something about the police describing a dark green vehicle. Dad, I said, steady despite the chaos, go outside. Look at the driveway. There was a pause. I could hear rain through the phone, a door opening, footsteps, silence. Then his voice returned, stripped of certainty. The Navigator is gone. In that moment, everything shifted. Logan hadn't wrecked my Subaru. He had wrecked Dad's Navigator. And for the first time in my life, there wasn't a way to rewrite the story before morning came. When I walked into the emergency department at St. David's that night, the fluorescent lights felt too bright for what had just happened. Hospitals always smell the same: antiseptic and exhaustion. And that smell hit me before I even saw my parents. Mom was sitting in a molded plastic chair, clutching a tissue like it was something solid she could hold on to. Dad was pacing, phone in hand, jaw tight, the way he looks when he thinks he can still control the outcome if he just talks loudly enough. Logan was in a curtained bay, propped up in a hospital bed, his right arm in a sling, a white bandage wrapped around one hand, and attached to the metal rail of that bed was a handcuff. A single, quiet, undeniable symbol that this was not going to be handled over a handshake. Dad turned on me immediately. "This is your fault," he said, voice sharp and raw. "If you'd just let him borrow your car." "My car is fine," I interrupted, and I surprised myself with how calm I sounded. "It's parked in a garage. Logan didn't take my car. He took yours." For a split second, the room went still. Dad blinked, like his brain was trying to process a language it didn't speak. "What?" he said. "The Subaru's not there," I said. "It hasn't been there all night." A state trooper standing near the doorway flipped through his paperwork. Vehicle involved is registered to Clint Marlowe, 2024 Lincoln Navigator. Dad's face drained of color. I watched the realization land, slow and heavy. The Navigator wasn't just a car. It was pride. It was status. It was something he'd polished every Sunday like it was sacred. And now it was wrecked on I-35, and his son was under arrest. The trooper's voice stayed steady, almost gentle in its detachment. "Your son is being charged with DWI and unauthorized use of a motor vehicle. His blood alcohol content was 0.10. Unauthorized use." That phrase hung in the air like smoke. Dad opened his mouth, but nothing came out. For the first time in my memory, he didn't have an immediate defense ready. No explanation. No excuse. No boys will be boys. Logan stared at the blanket on his lap like it might rearrange itself into something softer than consequences. Over the next 48 hours, everything that had always been handled quietly started happening in the open. Insurance was the first blow. I happened to be at my parents' house when Dad made the call. I was there to retrieve my keys, the ones Logan had grabbed like a challenge. Dad shut himself in his office, but he didn't close the door all the way. "Yes, I'm the policyholder," he said into the phone. "Yes, my son was driving." There was a long pause. "No," he said finally, quieter. "He wasn't authorized." That was the moment that struck me harder than the crash itself. Dad had spent Logan's entire life stepping in, softening edges, writing checks, smoothing over damage. But this wasn't a dent in a grocery store parking lot. This was a totaled luxury SUV and a DWI arrest. And when the claims adjuster explained that unauthorized use combined with intoxication voided the coverage, I heard something in Dad's breathing change. The claim was denied, just like that. No negotiation, no local connections, no friendly favors. $70,000 gone. And that was just the beginning. 2 days later, I learned something else that shifted the ground beneath all of us. I called Alyssa. I needed to understand what had pushed Logan into that spiral. When she answered, her voice was calm. Too calm. She wasn't in North Carolina. She wasn't at an airport. She was in her apartment in Round Rock. There had been no flight. It was a test. She wanted to see if Logan would show up for her without whining, without manipulating, without borrowing someone else's car. She wanted proof he could handle something simple and inconvenient. Instead, he stole his father's SUV and got arrested. She broke up with him that night. Quietly, no drama, just clarity. But the past wasn't done surfacing. A few days after the crash, a local Facebook page shared the arrest. Cedar Ridge man charged in DWI crash. It named Logan. It mentioned Marlowe Concrete and Fence, and someone named Hector Sandoval saw it. 2 years earlier, Logan had clipped Hector's parked car outside a restaurant. He'd been drinking then, too. Hector had called the police, and somehow Dad had arrived with cash, and the situation had evaporated before paperwork could harden. What Dad didn't know was that Hector had kept everything: photos, texts, and a voice recording of Dad offering money to handle it quietly. Hector sent it to the prosecutor. Now, this wasn't just a single mistake. It was a pattern. I was contacted by an investigator soon after. I told the truth. I forwarded Logan's text. Taking the car. You'll get over it. I explained that I had said no, that he had taken keys anyway. When Dad found out I cooperated, he didn't yell. He just sounded tired. Why would you do that to us? He asked. Because it's true, I said. Logan took a plea deal. Sentencing came in late summer at the Hays County Courthouse. The room felt heavy, like air had weight. The judge spoke about accountability, about how repeated chances without consequences can become dangerous. She talked about enabling like it was its own kind of negligence. Then she sentenced him to 14 months in county jail, probation, a suspended license, and restitution. 14 months. The bailiff cuffed him again, this time without rain or flashing lights, just quiet finality. Dad didn't stand. He didn't argue. He just watched. And for the first time in our lives, there was no one left to absorb the impact for Logan. Not Mom, not Dad, not me. Consequences had finally arrived, and they weren't asking permission to stay. It's been months now since the courtroom, since the sound of handcuffs closing in a quiet room instead of a rainstorm. And what surprised me most wasn't the sentence. It was the silence that followed. No dramatic family showdown, no screaming matches in the driveway, just a slow, steady rearranging of reality, like furniture being moved in the dark. Logan has been in county for several months. I visited him once. I don't know what I expected. Anger, maybe, or blame. But what I found instead was stillness. The jail visitation room looked exactly how you'd imagine. Hard chairs bolted to the floor, vending machines humming like tired bees, fluorescent lights that flatten everyone's face into something pale and unfinished. Logan walked in wearing a standard issue uniform, thinner than I'd ever seen him, his usual swagger replaced with something quieter. Not broken, not dramatic, just stripped. He didn't ask me for money. He didn't accuse me of betrayal. He just said, I didn't know who I was when nobody fixed it. I guess I'm figuring that out. That sentence sat between us for a long moment. Logan has always lived inside soft landings. There was always someone ready to cushion the fall. Without that net, he looked human, smaller, real. I didn't tell him everything would be okay. I didn't promise anything. I just said I hoped he used the time wisely. When I left, I didn't cry. I didn't feel triumphant either. I felt something steadier than both of those things. Clarity. Dad changed too, not overnight, not dramatically, but in the quiet spaces where pride used to live. He sold 2 company trucks within a month of the sentencing, contracts that once came easily slowed down. Some clients didn't want their projects associated with a name that had trended locally for the wrong reasons. He stopped talking about legacy. He stopped polishing things that didn't need polishing. He drives a used pickup now. Functional. Unnamed. I think losing the Navigator hurt less than losing the illusion that he could always protect Logan from the world. We have lunch sometimes now, just the 2 of us. No performance, no audience. A few weeks ago, over enchiladas at a small place off Main Street, he said something I never thought I'd hear. You were right to say no. It wasn't loud. It wasn't grand. It wasn't an apology in the traditional sense. But for my father, that was monumental. I didn't rush to fill the silence afterward. I didn't need to. Some acknowledgments don't require a response. They require space. And I gave him that. Mom started working part-time at a garden center. She says she likes being somewhere no one expects her to mediate anything. She comes home with dirt under her fingernails and stories about regular customers who argue about fertilizer like it's a moral issue. There's a new steadiness in her voice when she talks about her shifts. She recently told Logan she couldn't keep putting money into his commissary account every week. You need to budget what you earn, she said. I nearly dropped my phone when she told me that. It was such a small sentence, but it was revolutionary in our house. As for me, my life didn't explode into perfection. It just got lighter. I was promoted to operations lead at my firm after handling a brutal stretch of overlapping projects without unraveling. The raise wasn't life-changing, but the recognition was. For once, my competence wasn't assumed. It was acknowledged. I moved into a new apartment with covered parking and actual storage space. My Subaru sits beneath concrete every night, clean and untouched, exactly where it belongs. It's still just a car, but it also feels like a marker, a line in the sand. Every morning, I drive past the stretch of I-35 where the crash happened. The barrier has been repaired, fresh concrete, no visible scars. If you didn't know, you'd never guess what happened there. That feels symbolic somehow. The world repairs itself quietly. It doesn't announce that it's moved on. It just does. People in Cedar Ridge have mostly stopped talking. Gossip has a short attention span when there's nothing new to chew on. The story that once felt enormous has shrunk into something manageable. And in that quiet, I've had space to think about what actually changed. I didn't ruin my brother's life. I didn't orchestrate a downfall. I didn't manipulate events. I said no. That's it. I said no to lending my car. I said no to smoothing it over. I said no to lying for him when investigators called. I stepped back. I stopped absorbing impact. And without my silence filling the cracks, the truth moved in. For years, I thought boundaries were aggressive, that they made me cold, that saying no meant I was selfish. But boundaries aren't weapons. They're doors. You decide what comes in and what doesn't. And for most of my life, I had left that door wide open out of fear. Fear of conflict, fear of being labeled difficult, fear of disappointing people who were already halfway disappointed in me for existing outside their expectations. When I stopped holding the net, Logan fell. But falling isn't the same as being destroyed. Sometimes it's the first honest thing that happens to someone. Love without boundaries isn't love. It's permission. Permission to avoid growth. Permission to repeat mistakes. Permission to hurt people who will quietly clean up the mess. I don't feel victorious. I don't feel bitter. I feel aligned. For the first time in my life, my words and my actions match. I didn't shrink to make things comfortable. I didn't apologize for protecting what I built. I drive my car to work every morning, knowing that the crash didn't happen because I said no. It happened because Logan couldn't accept it. Reality isn't gentle, but it's fair in a way people rarely are. And living inside that fairness, without cushioning it, without rewriting it, feels like breathing clean air after years in a closed room. Life gets clearer the moment you stop rescuing people from lessons they desperately need. Boundaries aren't cruelty, they're quality control for your peace. Say no when you mean no, protect what you build, and let consequences do their unpaid internship. If you enjoy stories where karma clocks in on time, subscribe to Revenge Protocol on YouTube and drop a comment. Tell us who in your life needs a healthy dose of no.